everybody, happy July and happy Wednesday. You are on the Training, Learning, and Development cast. My name is Cara North, and I'm one of the producers here on TLDC. And I am really excited about the conversation that we're going to be having today. Now, I know this is actually a little bit kind of out of the scope of what we like to talk about, but I think it's so important for us as learning development professionals to really have a good grasp on not only what is going on in the world, but also how that impacts our population that we develop learning experiences for. So if this is your first time on TLDC, welcome. We're glad that you're here. We are just a community that meets a couple times a week. And we also have a Slack page, and I put that there in the chat, tldchat.us. Get you to our Slack page if you'd like to connect with other learning and development professionals. But I will say I'm really excited I connected with this gentleman right here. So Ankit and I are actually Ohio State alumni. Can I say we're alumni yet? I think we can
I'm
say
almost
that.
alumni.
Almost alumni, yes. So I met Ankit when I was working at the trademark rejected Ohio State University, and we just kind of hit it off. And I was just really excited about his story and his real passion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know personally I've learned a lot from him, and I thought it'd be great to bring him on and have him talk about a topic that I know I feel kind of uncomfortable about. I'm sure several of us kind of feel uncomfortable about how do we talk about race in our workplace. So, Ankit, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, sure. Well, thanks, Kara, for bringing me on TLD Cast. And just to give you a little bit about me, I am currently working at Ohio State as a career consultant for multi-generation professionals. In addition to that, I have been in education industry my entire life. That includes K-12, higher ed, and now I'm working with working professionals. And in my time, in my entire career, I have seen that diversity, equity, inclusion has been embedded in everything that I have done. And now with the racial tensions and everything that's happening, how do we elevate the voices of BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, so we can have more racial justice and racial inequality? So, having said that, Kara, if you're okay, I'm gonna go ahead and launch the presentation.
Yeah, I just wanted to check. We are getting a little bit of an echo feedback on your audio, Ankit.
Yeah.
So would you be kind enough to maybe turn down your speakers just a tad so we're not getting that feedback in? But yeah, you should go ahead and launch the presentation. We'll be good to go.
Okay. Is this better?
I still hear it a little bit, but I'm just going to keep monitoring the chat to make sure that people can hear you okay.
Okay. Let me know if this sounds better.
Okay, it looks like we got some. It sounds better, so let's rock and roll.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So, I'm about
As he's doing that, we have a couple polls if you want to interact with those, and there'll be a couple polls that reveal themselves throughout his presentation. So if you would be kind enough to interact with that, that would be wonderful.
awesome. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Kara. So let's start with, well, of course, this topic is how do we have brave conversation about race in our workplaces? So before I go to the next one, I'm actually going to start with Kara, if you want to pull the first one, just to see where you guys are about participating in challenging conversation about race at the workplace.
We have the votes coming in. It looks like several people look like they have so far. About 75% say yes and 25% say no.
Okay. All right. So I'm glad to hear at least we have a good number that have had them. And so I hope in this presentation today, you'll get some good nuggets on if you have had them, how do you make them better or to improve those conversation or, you know, take that action step. And if you have not done any because you're not comfortable or for whatever your reason might be, then this is going to give you the foundation and knowledge to be able to start a conversation. So, starting with our agenda, what I want to go over are these things. So then you know what to expect during this presentation. Okay. So, first thing is community norms. Okay. So, we're going to establish, you know, what is a good way for us to be in this meeting. I want you to be with me. I want you to understand how to have this dialogue, how to understand this presentation, and take the information with grain of salt because there are going to be some challenging things that I'm going to be throwing at you, and I want you to be comfortable with it because at the end, I know that conversations about race are not comfortable, but that's okay. Now we're going to make them, or at least give you the foundations, and then you begin to feel comfortable and start to have that conversation. Okay. So that's kind of community norms. Then we're going to talk about some definitions. There's definitely a lot of definitions in here, but I'm not going to go through all of them because this is, again, giving you that foundation. Then talking about why are these conversations about race so uncomfortable? What makes them uncomfortable? And then how do you begin to talk about it? How do you get focused? And then after getting focused, how do you go into small groups or one-on-one? How do you then make a positive impact? And then lastly, different ways to become an ally to support your BIPOC in your organizations. And then if you have any questions at the end. And as Cara said, there are going to be few poll questions throughout this presentation to help you engage and ask any or get your feedback. And I just want to let you all know that, Cara and I are going to be going a little bit back and forth. And in between, maybe we'll do a quick check-in to see, what all you are saying. If you have any specific comments or things that I can further dive deeper or share any additional knowledge, I'm happy to do that. But I want you to feel as engaged as possible. Okay. So without any further delay, let's get going. Okay. So with community norms, because like I said, we're going to just talk about, we're going to open this up and we're going to talk about something that's challenging or maybe you're not comfortable with. So what do you do in this space is, first of all, it's important to be an active listener and learner, right? Then breathe, especially if you've never done this conversation. You're like, I'm not sure exactly what to say. How do I say it? Am I going to offend somebody? Am I going to learn this information correctly? Take it all in. Take a deep breath and take this journey with me. Okay. Then listen to understand and not to respond, right? Because sometimes I think we all internalize quickly and we come to quick decision and we want to say something. So I'm going to challenge you today is really listen to understand and not to respond. We all want to assume a positive intent. I'm here with you today because I really want to provide this foundation, knowledge. I want to help bring a positivity in our workforce. And so I'm here to provide as much information as I can. So positive intent, and then I want you to own your impact. So what have you done thus far or what you have not been able to do? No judgments here, but I think recognizing that we own this. You own it. We all need to be in this together. And this is my favorite statement is what is said here through our communication stays here because I want you to feel safe and have the confidentiality. But then what is learned here leaves here, right? So you hopefully take it back into your workforce and talk to your colleagues and apply it in your own professional settings. Okay. So starting with some definitions. So these 5 are the ones that I'm going to focus on. On the next page, there's 5 more, but it's just for you to review. So starting with systematic or institutional racism. This is the one definition that I have, or one term that keeps coming up that I know for a fact that not many people have experienced or are not familiar with or did not understand. So I thought I would provide definition to this. So institutional racism refers to specifically to the ways in which institutional policies and practices create different outcomes for different racial groups. The institutional policies may never mention any racial groups, but their effect is to create advantages for whites and oppression and disadvantages for people from groups classified as non-white. Then privilege. What is a privilege? A right that only some people have access or availability to because of their social group memberships, or also known as dominance. Okay. Microaggressions. This is a term, by the way, and many of you in both of these or all these definitions, but one thing for sure, the microaggressions are continuously being experienced by BIPOC all the time, and they have been for a long time. So microaggression is a term that used for brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavior, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative can I say this? Prejudice, slights, and insults towards any group, particularly culturally marginalized groups. Okay, unconscious bias, which by the way we all have, whether we want to agree with it or not, we all carry them. They're learned stereotypes. They're automatic, unintentional, deeply ingrained, universal, and able to influence our behavior. And then last but not least, ally. Ally describes someone who supports a group other than one's own in terms of racial identity, gender, faith identity, sexual orientation, etc. Allies acknowledge disadvantages and oppression of other groups than their own. They take risks and support actions on behalf, commit to reducing their own complicity or collusion in oppression for those groups that sorry, one second. Okay. Invest in strengthening their knowledge and awareness of oppression. So these 5 definitions are really, really important for everybody to be familiar with, because I don't know about all of you, but I certainly have experienced all of this in my own personal and professional career. So whether it's systematic racism, not being privileged, facing microaggressions, continuous unconscious biases, and how do I become ally of others? Okay. Oops. Okay. Then these definitions, I'm not going to go through, but just for you to be familiar with, what is race, understanding discrimination, actually understanding racism, oppression, and prejudice. So I feel like these are the terms that most people are familiar with, they have heard of, but they also play a big part when we're talking about understanding race and how to talk about race at the workplace. Okay. Now, let's talk about why are conversations about race so uncomfortable? What makes them totally uncomfortable? So, based on my research and my own experiences, I've come up with 4 reasons. By no means these are the only reasons. Okay, these are just some that I have found that through research and what have you have highlighted most for me. Okay, so many people feel ill-equipped. They're just not prepared. They don't have enough knowledge. They're not comfortable, what have you. It's too painful. So a lot of people are empathizing. They know it's wrong. They are crying with BIPOC, and it's just too hard. Okay. But many non-BIPOC, once again, that stands for Black, Indigenous, people of color, are feeling split between guilt and defensiveness. So guilt is, oh man, I've experienced, or I've seen my colleagues experience microaggressions, or I've seen racism happen in the workplace, but it's subtle. But I couldn't take the nerve to stand up and do something about it. The other side and the defensiveness is, well, not all white people are racist, right? Like I'm not racist, right? And this is where are we becoming aware of our own unconscious biases and addressing them, or at least recognizing them, and what do we need to do? But that's what makes it uncomfortable, okay? And last but not least, this is not my favorite one, but it still exists. There are many people out there, they think that it's not their issues to address. They don't need to worry about it. So then, what do we do to start having this conversation? How do we begin this? So bring your most compassionate and vulnerable self to the conversation. Okay. So what that means is, remember, this conversation is hard for everyone. And if all of you who have had this conversation or haven't had, you're probably feeling that. Our society has this collective unspoken agreement to not to have this conversation because it's too messy. Remember that sharing racism experience, it is extremely painful. Okay? So let's go of the desire and wanting to have a perfect conversation and wanting to control the conversation. Okay? Be willing to enter another person's world with curiosity, which of course takes a courage. Okay. Second piece, educate yourself. There is a lot of literature, workshops, trainings like this available out there for you to have a deeper understanding about racism. I happen to work for a big public land grant institution, research-based institution. There's a lot of research, right? There are documentaries, there are YouTube videos. There's a lot of things out there. So I don't want anybody who feels like I don't know enough about this or I'm not comfortable. You're just going to depend on people of color. No, you need to take some ownership and educate yourself. Okay, and then be ready to listen. Okay, so listen deeply to see the world from another person's perspective. Stretch to make sense how this person experience have shaped their mindset. So I want to give you an example here. Okay, so I have heard many times that, oh, because you're Indian, you must be just really, really good at mathematics and science, or you must be a science professor. Okay, so making that assumption and putting me in a category or a box, have you actually asked me like why or who, what kind of work am I doing? Okay, and it hurts when people just naturally make assumption that I'm Indian and I'm not in those fields, because that means the field that I'm in is not worthy or value just because I'm Indian. Okay, so when somebody tells you a story that's challenging, it's very easy to just jump in and give a solution, or you want to fix everything. If you're that person that want to fix all the problems, sometimes are you really actively listening and hearing their perspective? Really important. Then the next piece is connect to the emotional experience of another person. So empathy is about feeling of pain of another person and deepens the connection, right? I'll give you another example. Um, there was a time when I was traveling with my family to India, and at this point, it was right after 9/11, and they pulled me aside or randomly pulled me aside at the airport. But then, if you look at everybody else, no, it was all individuals of color, and I just didn't happen to shave during that time, so I think they saw me as potential terrorists. Anyway, um, they had my face on the screens with red X on it. So everybody was able to see it. And as I walk out from my integration or, the questioning, everybody's looking at me. So at that point, even though I hadn't done anything, I became this person that people feared. How do you empathize with that, right? Can you say, I'm so sorry you experienced this. I wonder, you probably felt really bad. But like, you don't have to give me an answer. You just have to say that is wrong, right? That should not have happened. But what can I do for you? How can I help you process that information? And unfortunately, these things continue to exist in our society, right? But these are just some examples that I'm trying to give you what other people or people of color might be experiencing. Okay. Then dig deep to understand the values that are important to us, connect with them with the need of the moment. This is really critical. So think about who you are, where do you fit in this space of, this challenging, high rise in killings of people of color, especially Black people, what are your values? When a person is telling you a story, how do you connect to that story to your values and then address the moment during that time? So at the end, everything that I'm telling you about so far, it's beside the education part, how are you bringing your emotions to work? Which many of you may have heard before. Don't bring your emotions to work, right? We're supposed to leave them outside. But this is one time or many times where you have to bring your emotions because there's a lot of emotions when it comes to facing racism. And then how do you understand it? How are you communicating it? How are you engaging with it? All of those things. Then one of the things that I continuously have heard, I don't know what to say. I empathize with you, but I don't know what to say. Well, you may not know the perfect things to say, but speaking from the heart and being transparent is a place to start. Okay.
Hey
So
Ankit,
now,
I want to address a couple things coming in the chat. This great discussion going on. Can you speak a little bit more maybe about the use? You said BIPOC. It looks like there might be some folks asking a little bit more about maybe the use of that term. Q actually dropped a link in the chat about it being kind of a complicated term. What are some other terms that maybe you've heard when you've talked about diversity that maybe you might want to share?
sure. So, if I'm understanding the question correctly, Kara, please correct me if I'm wrong. Are we thinking about just different terminology in general outside of BIPOC?
Yeah, that looks like that's what the chat is about. Just basically, even just using that, it can be a little bit complicated. Q has a nice link to an article here about just linguistics and how it's really hard to even just use that term sometimes to even talk about folks. So I just didn't know. It looks like Jack also said they have a term called BAME, BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. I didn't know if you knew any other terms maybe going around.
So to be honest and to be frank with you, I'm not familiar with any other terminology, but here's what I'd say, and I'm sure they exist. And what I want you to do, so this is the time, where can you go and educate yourself, right? I still continue to educate myself just because I'm a person of color. I don't have all the answers, right? But what I'm trying to do is give you some basic foundation. So here's some things to consider. Okay. When you're not sure what how to address someone, how to address a situation, what you want to do is you want to ask open-ended questions, right? You want to go in with, so recently in my trainings, in my conversation, in my education, here's what I have learned. So if you could become comfortable with BIPOC or the other acronym that was shared, that's great. But let's not make an assumption that all these other people may know. And that's why I made sure that when I say BIPOC, I also said Black, Indigenous, people of color, right? So when you don't know, please ask. Don't make assumption and educate yourself for other things or other ways to address. And you know what? One thing that I have seen being discussed continuously, even in this situation, is how are we effectively talking about diversity, equity, inclusion? So DE&I is the term that is being used collectively across the globe, and what each of those means and how you can represent those terms depending on the situation or circumstances or conversation you're having. If you're at least familiar with diversity, equity, inclusion, and then some of these acronyms, I think you can begin to feel a little bit confident on how to start these conversations or to have these conversations or further the conversations. Did I
That's great.
answer? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, if you could just elaborate a little bit more, I think that dovetails in. Rubina had a great question about where can people go to educate themselves more on racism.
Right. So I think, so look at where you are, right? Because I don't know about all of you, but COVID-19 and working remotely has created many challenges, right? So to me, education is accessible in lots of different spaces in lots of different ways. So first thing that comes to mind, if you, once again, I'm never going to make an assumption here. So if you've attended in any sort of higher ed institution, going back to your alma mater and reconnecting with your institution and seeing what sort of alumni learning opportunities are available in race relations. That's one. Then finding opportunities like this where you can identify workshops and trainings and coffee conversations and I don't know about all of you, but I've definitely seen on LinkedIn continuous panel sessions, work trainings like this, or intensive identity-based workshops that you can attend. If some of these don't fit your time frame, then you can also go look at things like LinkedIn Learning. LinkedIn Learning also provides a lot of ongoing education about diversity, equity, inclusion. And come think about it, I actually did a certification through LinkedIn Learning on diversity, equity, and sense of belonging certification. So there's that, but then there's other platforms like Udemy, Coursera, edX, LinkedIn, what have you. Resources are plentiful. If you don't know where to start, I would say start with who's around you, who are your partners, who in your organization that you're working with that may be providing this type of education. All it takes is to ask, right? I think a lot of the times we're afraid to go and ask someone in our own organization, with everything that's going on, I have this much understanding, or maybe I understand these components, but I want to get a deeper understanding of a couple new areas. Would you have any recommendations? So you can even go to your HR space, your training development space, your alma mater, all these other spaces. There's plenty of space. Is there any more questions, Kara, that I should address at this point?
I will save the other one for a little bit, I think, because it's a great kind of, I think, ending summary question.
Okay. Okay. So I think are we ready for our next poll?
Sure.
Okay. So the next poll is, I now feel comfortable to start a conversation about race at my workplace.
Okay, the poll is live and looks like we have 36% saying yes and 63% saying no.
Okay. Okay. So let me think here. So if people who are not comfortable, and I know we just started this. So before I go to this next step, can somebody provide further understand or further elaboration on what points or what would make you feel a little bit more energized or to at least start this conversation? So like what are some other confusion do you have that I can address at this point in time? Because if 60% of you are still thinking, I don't know where to start, and it's because maybe you're still digesting information that I told you, and maybe you have to go back and educate yourself or digest this or process it, that's completely fine. But is there something more specific that I can also address at this point? So if you want to put that in the chat, I'm happy to address it right now or as we continue. So, Kara, do you think if it's okay to give them maybe a minute or two? So if there's any
Sure.
additional questions? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to read the responses, but I also don't want to say the folks' names because if this gets played on the podcast, I don't necessarily want people's names attached to things. So,
Okay.
one of the responses is not losing my job. I don't trust HR. Another response is, it's easy to question about HR whether you or your company's interest is the main focus. So it sounds like just, I guess, repercussions is kind of what I'm
Yeah.
getting from the chat.
Yeah. So I appreciate those comments because you know what, being a person of color, I also worry about that. But you know what? I'll say, and this is where I'm asking you all to be maybe a little bit brave. I'm not saying go out and do all these things, but maybe it's not the HR space, but I think it's looking at within your organization and how can you, depending on your understanding and where you are in your comfortability, where can you go and start building a community within your area where you invite colleagues that you have good relationships with or colleagues that you want to get to know more, right? Because here's the other piece that during this, challenging times, everybody probably feels like you're walking on some type of eggshells, right? So, and I completely get it and I respect that. And I know that this is hard to do. But I think this is where one place I will challenge you is who can in your organization that you can go to is a champion that's willing to at least start a dialogue or having conversations about this challenging topic, right? So maybe it is not HR. Maybe it is, your mid-level manager, and maybe he starts out in a small group. Okay. So to me, it's not matter of the numbers. I think it's the quality of the conversation. But the first and foremost, what you have to do, you have to check in with yourself to see where you are and what your comfortability is. Because one thing I will never say is I'm not gonna, make you do or suggest things that you're way out of your comfort zone. But I think there is a point here where if we don't start something, right? And I don't know if all of you, in some capacity in your organization, did have listening sessions. I know in our organization, we did have where we invited the entire organization to come and have a listening session. And, BIPOC came and shared their lived experiences. But then after that, people were saying, now what? So at least our organization now is working on developing a workshop similar to this to give people somewhat of a foundation so they can start to feel at least a little bit comfortable. But then, so I'm by the way part of a committee called Inclusion Council, but specifically I'm the chair of encouraging brave conversations across my entire organization, which is about 600 employees. So we're going to provide this sort of foundation, and then we're going to talk about what steps can you take to have even smaller conversation. And this is where what I went through about, bringing your emotions, educating yourself, actually listening, asking questions, engaging in emotional experience, right? All these things that are on that emotional intelligence side, you need to experience and it's authentic experience to be able to acknowledge, understand, empathize, connect, and learn. So you have to do multiple things to be able to, process this through and dive deeper to engage in a challenging topic. Because you know what? And just because I'm able to present this does not mean I'm the expert for everything about brave conversation. Because being a person of color, here's what I have learned, right? If I want to make a positive impact and change, I am willing to take a little bit of risk and go out and provide knowledge based on my research and experiences so I can empower communities around me, right? And this is my one way to share and provide some of my vulnerable experiences through education. So, but that's me, right? Like I found my story, I found my journey and the way to give back. But what is yours, right? That's where I will challenge you, even when it's not comfortable, when it doesn't feel completely safe. What kind of risks are you willing to take that doesn't have to hinder your job? Or, especially because I understand being a career consultant and we have 40 million, over 40 million who are laid off or furloughed. I'm not saying let's worry about losing your job, but for us to be able to move forward in having a positive action in our organization, we do have to take some type of a risk. And what is that risk for you in your organization? What steps are you willing to take to make this change and be part of the action and moving our country forward instead of just at the listening side? Any other thoughts that have come in, Kara?
Yeah, we have a couple of just really, I think, great things that people have brought up. One person said they feel like this would be like asking the police for a complaint form to have this kind of a conversation. So, and then others say that they don't want to make their coworkers feel uncomfortable, and they also don't feel like it's right for them to bring it up if they're not ready to have that conversation because it feels invasive.
Mm, I can see that. So I think this is where it. So I'm sorry. Can you say the one about the police one more time?
Yeah, it's like asking police for a complaint form.
Okay. So okay. And then what was the last one? I'm sorry.
That they don't want to necessarily spring it on their colleagues if they're not ready to have this conversation because it feels invasive.
Okay. So that's fair. That's fair. So what I will say about that is colleagues in your own network. So people that you have recently, or no, that you may have known for a long time. So maybe people in your existing network who may have been going through challenges for a long time and now it's just heightened. So, you know, people of color are finding spaces to go, okay, I think I have an opportunity to share my story. I have opportunity to educate or empower. So if a colleague is not ready, of course I don't want you to push them or challenge them. But what other spaces excuse me, in your organization are you having, or is there any opportunity in your organization for you to have a conversation? So does that mean talking to your immediate manager? Is it mean um, recognizing, what sort of communities are created internally? Um, there's a lot of ways to navigate this, and I completely understand this is not black and white. So the way to understand, the way to be part of these conversation and take it to the next level is sort of stepping into the moment and knowing when things are being put on pause. So, you know what? I would like to just ask a quick question. How many of your organizations sent out a message saying that they stand against racism? They totally don't, what I call it sometimes. It's a great statement that they stand out, but do they really believe in it? So, can you just put it in the chat box, yes or no, that your organization sent out some type of communication about standing against racism?
That's a great question. I actually stopped myself from mentioning it on social media, but I did see a recent conference planning committee share a picture of the planning committee, and there was like no diversity on that whatsoever. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. Looks like the majority of the chat are saying yes, that their organization did send out something about racism. And I know my
Okay.
organization did as well.
Okay. So now the next question I have for all of you, I know Kara, go with me right here, is after that initial message, did your organization internally send out second or third round of communication about how are they, or are they going to take any action steps to help us move towards more racial equity or justice in the workplace in their organization? Was there any of that sort of communication? Yes or no?
That's a great question. I'm going to say something that I have here in the chat. NASCAR also did, but who wants to be on the wrong side of NASCAR given their history? Well, I know that wasn't meant to be funny, but you do have a valid point in saying that. So it looks like one person said yes, that their organization has done a follow-up communication about action items, but that looks
Okay.
like the only person who has said that in the chat.
Ah, okay. So this is starting to make a little bit more sense now. So if your organization has not done anything after that initial communication, and I'll be blunt about this, it's sort of like a lip service. And they said it because it makes them look great, from external perspective and even internal perspective. But if there's no action step after that, then I can see how all of you might be like, I don't know if I can go just start talking to other people. I completely get it now. This makes more sense. So I think now is, so within your organizations, who are some core champions? And what I mean by that is, in decision maker, in leadership positions, who can you go to, that is willing to at least have a conversation? Not saying that they have to make an action or decision, but I think one of the suggestions I have too, especially when you're in an organization that's not, it's not ready to take that next step or don't know what that next step should be. So then that's where connecting with individuals that believe in this work, and they're looking for other champions within the organization to come together and kind of create almost an informal, let's call it for time being, like D&I group, um, and see like what kind of momentum can they create that's going to be appropriate and welcome in that culture, right? Because I think there are ways we can slowly push, right? And so it doesn't have to be very direct, it doesn't have to be aggressive. I don't want anybody's job being impacted, especially in these tough economic times. But I think if we really believe in the mission of this work and we really want to see that racial equity and justice, then just sitting there not doing anything is also not good enough, right? So this is where I need folks or white people to get a little bit more creative and see like what other ways can I make impacts? Okay. What do I need to do? Or once again, finding those champions and see if you can form a small committee and see what kind of internal small actions can you make. Because I'll say this, and you may have heard this already before, what we have started, which has been going on for a long time, but finally we're seeing a little bit of momentum. And for us to continue, we know this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So what you can do in your internal organization or in your organization, it's going to look different from person to person. But I think just by being afraid and not engaging with others in a way that's going to help us move that needle, even if it's a little bit, it's better than nothing. So how do we challenge ourselves and get outside of our comfort zones or comfortability to just push ourselves without hindering our jobs to continue these dialogues and reconnecting with colleagues or leadership to take us to the next level? Okay. And this might mean maybe you are going to have a conversation with your leadership on, would they be open to providing training similar like this, or even specifically education on race relations at the workplace, right? Is that something, a possibility? You're not pushing it, but you're just asking to see if you can learn, right? And how do we get better? Because then we can meet our customer needs, our key stakeholder needs. It will help increase our productivity internally because you get your employees buy-in, right? So sometimes to connect with the leadership is connecting with the business, right? And connecting with our ROIs and our productivity and our efficiency. So if there's a way you can take what some of your colleagues may be feeling internally, or the challenges, to say like, if we're willing to, if we're open to educating and providing training, this will actually help our organization, um, take our organization to that next level. Okay. Any other comments, Kara?
Think we're ready to move on.
Okay. Okay. So now, uh, so let's say hopefully in some shape or form, you are ready to have this conversation, or maybe you're exploring it, depending on where you are. So there's three things that I want you to keep in mind to get focused. First is prioritize self-care. So what that means is, in order, and I think I've kind of addressed this before, is before you lean into this conversation, whenever you're ready to lean into this conversation, only lean in when you're actually ready. Like, what do you need to do? So that self check, that introspection. Are you not comfortable? Do you need to educate yourself? Maybe you need to just, you're exhausted from this continuous conversation and you just need time to reflect and turn it off, because that will help you re energize. So, whatever that looks like, you need to do, because the only way we're going to have more productive and emotional conversations is where you are comfortable and you're ready to bring that emotion into the conversation. So, then the next thing is, how do we identify the mutual goal? Okay. So, what is it that you and the other person want to achieve through this conversation, right? If these conversations need to happen in phases, you do not have to solve everything in the first conversation. You may have a session where you're just venting and sharing, okay? The next session, maybe you get some clarity and ask questions, right? But I think when you're ready to have it, it's good to create the structure to know what the both of the party can expect, right? So if you're going in because you just want to understand that person's experience and or their lived experience and what they may have gone through, so you can have a better understanding of racism that that person may have experienced, then you want to set that tone ahead of time, right? Like you can um, address it and say, I really want to connect because I want to get a deeper understanding of what you may have experienced. And I just want to, before maybe I become an ally, I want to have a deeper understanding of what different individuals may have experienced. And only if you're open to this, I would love to learn from you and from your experiences. Okay. Then identify the needs of the other person and the collective group. So to be able to find a mutual goal, we have to be willing to understand that other person's needs, right? Behind every request is a desire for something and a fear that desire is not being met. It can be tough to do this if you feel threatened or angry about other person's views or actions. However, to set us up to move forward to where we are, we have to be willing to look towards a new future and what each participant needs to get there. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Any other comments, Kara, that I should address at this point?
I think we're good.
Okay. So, if I remember correctly, Kara, I think it's time for us to do our next poll. Which I think is, do you feel it's okay to share your emotions about race? How's it going, Kara?
Looks like we have 100% yes, they do feel like it's okay to share their emotions about race in the workplace.
Awesome.
Nope, nope, we actually just got a vote no. So most people.
Okay. Um, well, that's good, because I think this is one of the bigger pieces that I think sometimes we forget about. When we're talking about obviously a very challenging topic like racism, you know, but I don't know about you all, but like I've been trained my entire career to say, nope, you leave emotions out and you bring yourself. Even though you may have heard like bring your authentic self, but how do you leave emotions out? So I think being able to truly share your emotions, and I think today, even in this workshop, you challenged me, and I appreciated that because I think it challenges my thoughts, and even as a person of color, and how I'm giving back and providing knowledge and continue to improve. Because through these constructive conversations, we will learn and grow together and hopefully break that silence about racism in our workplace. Okay, so now let's say you got focused, you know what to do. And so these are kind of step by step how you can go into a small group or one-on-one conversation. Okay, so here's step one. Invite a person or small group of people with different perspective to engage in a brave conversation. So now I'm thinking about all of you who do not feel comfortable. And maybe I think some of you did, but majority of you didn't. So I think this is where, for you to be able to do this, you have to start, and maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, all of you, but maybe it's outside of your organization. Maybe you do it in your personal spaces, additional training outside, like one you're attending right now, in talking to friends or family members or being part of different groups for you to engage and contribute differently. Um, you know, then like learning that information, and then how do you bring it into the workplace after you have some detailed understanding. So it's going to look very different from person to person, organization to organization. And I wish I had a perfect formula that I would tell all of you on how to start this. But as all of you know, or may be familiar, this is definitely difficult. Hence, racism is difficult. But we still need to find a way to woven in. Okay. So let's say now you are ready. So you do that first step. And I definitely recommend that you want to plan for at least 30 to 60 minutes for this conversation. Participants should verbally agree to have positive intent and follow the community norms, right? So you set the tone right at the get go, like I did at the beginning of this presentation. Here's a piece sometimes that is hard to do, especially when the information that you're hearing is difficult. Okay. Balance talking and listening during the conversation, especially if you are a person that wants to fix everything. When it's a challenging experience, our brain is naturally triggered to say, this is what I should say, or this is what I should do, or I should say something right now. You don't have to. So it's okay to allow to have pauses in the discussion to further process the information and reflect about the conversation. Because I realize many of us in our workplace, and this includes me too, are uncomfortable with this pauses, this awkward pauses. But in this situation, it's good to pause, right? And if you are collecting and digesting information, then do that and tell that person what you just shared with me. I'm going to take a minute or a few seconds to digest this and process it, and internalize, so then I can be ready to say something in return. You can verbalize those things. Um, of course, commit to avoid any judgments, defensiveness, and anger, and try to express any negative feelings or different views constructively and from a place of giving, as opposed to being positional or needing to be right. Right? Especially if it's a comment that may be like, white people need to take on a lead. But why is it only white people? Why isn't it all people? Or Black Lives Matter. Why is it only Black lives? It should be all lives. I've heard all of these things, and that's what I'm sharing with you. So in that moment, even if you don't say that, if you're thinking it, how do you take a step back and go, am I listening? Like, am I just getting defensive, or am I just starting to already make judgment because I'm hearing something that is completely conflicting and it's not agreeing with my value? But at the same time, how do I recognize and what this person is experiencing? Right? Lots of emotions are coming into this conversation. Okay. So as you go through this, and you know what, I would not be surprised if some of you who have had this conversation, maybe you cried. I know I have. Maybe you took a day or two off because you just couldn't internalize and process everything that that person or those people have been experiencing for majority of their life. So those are all okay things to do because it's teaching us to be more understanding and walk the walk, talk the talk of people of color, or black indigenous people of color are continuously express or experiencing on a daily basis. So just walk into that moment and what is that like? Then you can start to empathize and maybe understand. So towards end of it, you want to complete this experience, of course, by thanking your partners, which I know it's fairly obvious. But you do want to thank, you want to acknowledge that even though this conversation was difficult, you acknowledge that their willingness to come and talk and understand. And then here's an action steps even within this. So once you did this, what's next? So next could be identify if that person or that small group is open to reconnecting to continue this conversation to gain additional perspective, right? So maybe that group is exhausted and they're like, nope, I need to take a break for like a month. Okay. But maybe they're saying, you know what? I'm going to internalize this, but I can see how continuing this conversation is going to help me grow, and help me get out of my comfort zone, and how to build momentum. And more importantly, how do we keep moving forward in getting ready to take an action step? Okay. Okay. I think we're ready for the next one, Kara.
All right, is this the ally one?
No, this is the
The
what
step?
what do you think is one of the most important steps? Yeah.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it is now live. So, what do you think is one of the most important steps anyone needs to take prior to participating in a conversation about race? So, your options are learn everything you can about race relations, connect with folks at the workplace to learn about race, take care of yourself and your mental well being, or attend professional development sessions about race in the workplace. All right, we have some votes on the connecting with folks to learn more about race. We have votes on take care of yourself and your mental well-being.
Okay.
Mostly on that last one there, the taking care of yourself.
All right. Well, and do we have most of the responses by now, Kara?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So, yep, if you said take care of yourself and your mental well being, you are correct. Because once again, in order to start this, you can call it a brave conversation, challenging conversation, encouraging conversation, however you want to define it, check yourself first. See where you are. Where do you fit in this? Everything that's happening with you, with our society, and however you want to move forward. So that is definitely the most important piece about yourself, and take care of yourself. Okay. Okay. So now, how do we? So now that maybe you've had some conversations and you've taken this step, how do we ensure that we're going to have positive impact? Okay, so we definitely want to use that positive and persistent pressure. And I think I've kind of talked about this a little bit. So we do that by we push ourselves and others out of comfort zones, without shaming is the only way to truly inspire commitment, right? Shaming is definitely not something you ever want to do. Um, Okay. And then we want to create a space that focuses on learning, self awareness, forgiveness, action, and just a different way to continue the dialogue. Okay. Then we also want to make sure we commit to one next thing. What is that action plan that you're going to be able to take? Okay. And then understand that white people do need to take a lead because whether we believe it or not, majority of our workforce, especially in leadership or non-leadership, is still predominant by white identities. So how do we work with all people, including white people, to help us move forward in this momentum or continuum? Okay. And how are you going to do that? You can become an ally. Okay, so there's a different types of ally. You can become a sponsor, and what that means is, recommend people for stretch assignments or learning opportunities. You can be a champion, is advocating for women, people of color, members of other represented groups. You can be amplifier. um, that means when someone proposes good ideas or repeats it, make sure you were giving them credit. You can be an advocate. Um, what that means is let's look closely to invite list of events, or how are we inviting people to plan our meetings or dinners. How are we advocating for different folks within our organization? You can be a scholar. That means you can investigate, read publications, podcasts, social media. You can be an upstander, which means always speak up if you witness behavior, speech that is degrading or offensive. And then last but not least, you can be a confidant. That means believes other experiences. Don't assume something couldn't happen just because you haven't personally experienced it. And I know I kind of ran through this really quickly because I want to be mindful of our time, but these are just some ways you can start being present and advocating and supporting our BIPOC in the workplace. And that's it, Kara.
All right, excellent. Really great topic, really a lot of stuff for us to consider, and I do have a couple Q&As. So, first question that you have is from Rubina asking a little bit more about if you can explain the differences between diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay. So I want to be mindful of time, Kara. So how much more do we want to go?
I mean, we still have people here, so let's see what we can get out. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, and I really appreciate this question. So to me, diversity is when how are we looking at the representation in our organization, right? From identity to gender to race, right? All of those things. That's diversity. Equity is, are we providing equal or equitable opportunities for all professionals, especially staff of color, right? Because many times, due to systematic racism, staff of color are continuously oppressed and are pushed down. And that's why you don't see equitable representation in upper leadership. Inclusion is the term that we can all understand. It's how do you want to be included in your organization, which also connects with sense of belonging. And so, do you want to be included through effective communication, representation, right? So that's why those three terms go together, because we need equal representation, we need inclusion because it helps us have a sense of belonging, and that's what brings those three terms together. I do want to say that is not the only way to define it. I am not the expert for all of those terms, but I'm telling you just based on my own studies. I'm in my second graduate study, studying workforce development education, specifically adult ed. I'm learning all the time. Learner is my top strength. So if you find other definitions out there, they're absolutely welcome.
Great. All right. Another question is, how do you ask if colleagues are ready to chat? What's a good approach to that?
How do you ask colleague for what? I'm sorry.
Oh, how do you ask colleagues if they're ready to chat about race? What's a good approach?
So I really, really appreciate this question. So I think this where I say ask, don't assume, right? So I think it's about you have to gauge that person. And so have once again, this is where my career hat also comes in. One of the largest gap skills in a workforce are communication skills. Okay. And so you have to check the pulse of that person and see where they are and look at the verbal, nonverbal cues. And based on what's happening and the type of conversations that are happening in your organization, you'll see when, especially if it's a BIPOC, and they start like sharing, you know what, I've experienced this challenge in my entire career. Or there was one time in my life when I faced this microaggression. So then in that moment, with permission, right? So you say, thank you for sharing that with the group or with that person. Would it be okay with you if I asked you one or two more questions so I can understand your experience better? And you also have to realize that each person is their own individual, and the way they're going to respond to answering that may be positive or not positive, but you in that moment need to have a little bit of a thick skin, right? To go, maybe that person is ready, maybe that person is not ready. But I think having that mindset to go and open up that conversation, you're already giving a positive vibe to that person that you want to learn, you want to get better, you want to make an impact. So
Great. I think that's all that we had for the formal Q&A. Um, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
oh, thank you for asking. Please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then, I don't know if you guys had opportunity to see before, but I'm in, as Kara said earlier, right? I'm in few things. And so I'm involved in a couple associations that connect with, so like, I don't know if all of you know COATD, which is Central Ohio Association of Talent and Development, just HARACO, which is Human Resource Association. But I also work at Ohio State or the Ohio State. And there's a lot of spaces you can connect with me, but I am here and I really, really want to thank you all for coming today because I want to. The reason why, first of all, Kara is an awesome person. So thank you, Kara, for bringing me into this conversation. And second, this is honestly my way to start giving back to BIPOC community and in the workplace because you know what? Maybe like some of you, but I'm definitely exhausted from continuous racism, microaggression, and discrimination that I have faced in the workplace my entire career. And so, and I said, enough is enough. And so the way for me to not just vent and just complain, right? I don't want to be that person of color that like, he's only complaining. So having education background, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do my best to do the research, connect with people, and give them knowledge and foundation so that they can start making momentum in their own workplaces. And this is my way of contributing with just community in general, but especially for BIPOC community. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think we have a lot of action items. I mean, this is definitely, I hope, a fight that us as learning development professionals want to take on. If no one else is going to take accountability for it and really kind of raise the bar, hopefully we can kind of pick up the flag and do something with it. I'm really hoping. You gave a lot of great tips and advice tonight. I really appreciate your time, Ankit, and I really want to elevate you as a DEI professional because I've learned a lot from you personally, and hopefully you all have learned things as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end everything. Thank you so much. Don't forget to connect with Ankit. And yeah, again, keep fighting the good fight. So have a
Thanks,
good rest of
Cara.
your evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you coming.